Hello, and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. I know it has been a minute again, but this is an exciting episode because you have all four of us on the podcast today. So I am Lisa, I am your host, but I have all my co-hosts here today. I have Tandy, I have Katie, I have Christina, and we are really excited to be back because we're not going to call each one a very special episode because then that would sound like we're doing a weird don't take drugs kids things and that would be strange. But today is a very special episode because we are finally getting around to talking to Christina about her second book. So we're going to chat all about Filthy Queens. I know it's been a while because it actually came out back in October, I want to say. Is it that long?
January, end of January.
January. Okay, so
January.
it's not as bad as I think. It was in
Yeah, because
January.
I thought I remembered pre-orders near Christmas. That was,
There were
you know,
pre-orders, yes.
yes.
So it was January. So we are really, really excited to finally dive into talking about Filthy Queens and what that means about beer, what that means about Ireland. We're really excited to talk about it. But before we dive in, first of all the usual, follow us on the socials. We are usually on Blue Sky, on Threads, on Instagram. You won't find us in the other place as such. And I know many of you watch us on YouTube. That's, you do you, we don't judge. But, do follow us in all of the places. We're still going kind of monthly-ish. So if you heard our Eurovision episode, obviously Eurovision has come and gone for this year. We'll get back to that next year. But since it has been a little while, before we dive in with all the, sort of exciting things, we're going to get a little roundup of who's doing what. But before we get into that, we'll do a what are you drinking? So I'll just go kind of in order of how I see people. So Christina, we'll start with you since you're our guest and host of honor today.
I have a Rascal's Jailbreak Lager, which is sort of a classic beer that I definitely reach for. It's just a great lager. I think you can tell a lot about the brewery with how awesome their lagers are, and Rascal's makes a really nice lager.
Here, 100% agree. And Katie, what have you got?
I have got a Lineman Vertigo, which is a double black IPA. And I've already drunk half of it because I'm a little bit out of practice at this podcasting thing, and now I'm doing faffing around at the start of it rather than just recording a podcast. So I've drank half of it, and it's a school night, so God knows what I'll be like in the morning. But I do love this. I've had it on tap as well in Underdog, and it's absolutely fabulous. So I really like it.
Oh, very good. And Tandy, what have you got?
I've got a Midnight Mischief. It's a Märzen from Whiplash.
Oh,
I
lovely. Oh, I do
know.
like that one.
The
Yes.
name is
Yes.
fabulous.
Isn't it so cool? And obviously lovely graphics and visuals because Whiplash are just very, very good at that. But yes, it's delicious. And I love this style. So I was thrilled. Ash went to, or my husband went and popped to the shops like literally very quickly because I was like, I didn't even plan a beer and all the things. And he's like, what should I get? I said, you just choose something, it'll be fine. And he teased me. He said, I'm going to get you a double IPA. And I was like, fine, just do it. But he came home with the right one. So we're very pleased.
Oh, very good. And I'm definitely, team year-round Mertzen, like what make it happen here for it. So
Hmm.
no shame in that. So I think it's
Here for
interesting
that.
and appropriate for tonight's episode. I've got a Kinnegar, actually of the Low Tide, which is no longer a non-alcoholic. Now it's a low alcohol pale ale. So it's gone from being, the 0.5 or whatever to 1%. And I have to say I really much prefer it now as the low versus the no. And obviously there's room for both of those things, but I think it's really interesting. I'd love to see more things in this part of the market, especially for, like you said, Katie, for when it is a school night or when you just want to not have too much. And again, because I've got a lot of crazy work travel stuff coming up, I'm trying to be low key for a little bit. So this is kind of perfect. Really excited. But I love that we have all independent Irish craft beers. So excited about that. Again, very much on theme for tonight for talking all about Irish beer. But before we dive into it, as I said, we're going to have a quick round the horn. What are we all up to? Just because it's been a hot minute. So Christina, I'm going to leave you for last because you've gone and written damn books, and we're gonna get to that. So we'll come back to you. But actually, Katie, let's start with you. What are your highlights of late?
I have stripped every little piece of wallpaper from the walls of this house. They are not all
Nice.
painted yet, this is how many months later? How long am I in here? But oh my God, I do it in fits and starts. And also quite recently, myself and Lisa ran the VHI Women's Mini Marathon, which,
Yes, we did.
considering Lisa's done the half marathon, wasn't much for her, but it was a big deal for me.
But let's
So
remember, I did
I'm
injure
very
myself in the half, so I was still coming back from injury for this. So we both were amazing and both rocked it. It was great fun.
we're
Amazing.
both we're both amazing. We're both amazing. And I knocked a whole 3 minutes. Hey,
I mean, that's amazing. I love that. Wonderful.
still
Yay.
Amazing.
still not fast. Still not fast. But you know what? I got up and I did it.
It's about
And
doing it. It's not,
then
yeah, it's not about the time. It's all just the experience. And we had some pints after, so we were
we
rehydrated.
had some isotonic beverages straight out. Straight
We
into the
did.
bloodstream. It was very, very good.
It was a good day. Tandy, what about yourself?
Jeepers, I don't even know what I've been up to, guys. I've been working too damn hard, and there's no sign of this stopping. Uh, but the only other thing that I've been consumed with is sewing. We touched a little bit on it in Eurovision, but I've been teaching myself or reteaching myself how to sew, and I enjoy apparently making my life difficult. So I'm basically teaching myself how to pattern draft, not how to follow patterns. But it's also mostly because I don't follow recipes when I cook, so I don't find it easy to follow patterns either, even though I've done it like once or twice. But so I've just been playing around and joining Reddit sewing challenge bingos and all sorts of like fun stuff. So it's been very strange. But it's also like I've not come out of winter yet, in that
Mm,
everything is a little bit still homey and indoors, and I need to get better. But in between that, a little bit of pickleball and a little bit of travel coming up, and balance is coming again.
here, here.
And I loved what you shared in our group, that jacket with the oh
Yes.
my God, that was fabulous. I want one.
Thank you.
Unreal,
That
Yes.
was
Sandy. You're
hard.
really, really good at that.
Whew. We're trying, guys. We're trying, but it's fun. It is fun. I'm now in the process of making. Well, I'm in the process of planning for making a dress for a wedding at the end of the month. So that's going to be another
So cool.
sort of big one, but it's going to be fun. Yes.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Oh, can't wait for it. Yeah, so my news
Mm.
is, I'm still relatively new in my new job and I'm loving it, but it is a lot. Like you said, Tandy, there's still a lot just to absorb and take in. And I'm also finishing up a book too, but not a cool book like Christina's. I'm finishing up a business book. It's not as exciting. But the nice thing is we're in that final stage just before submission. And so, first round of edits and all of that. So it's almost done, almost out the door. I may need to pick your brain for a couple of pro tips and all of that good stuff. But again, all of that is not nearly as exciting as the fact that Christina, you've got book number 2 out. So with no further ado, Filthy Queens. And we'll start with all the basics. Yeah, we can just see it if those are watching. So Filthy Queens, a history of beer in Ireland. So, and again, I think for those who have not seen the book yet, it is the most beautifully designed thing as well. It's just gorgeous cover. Love the Dance Macabre on it. And I love all the illustrations inside. And we'll chat a bit about how that all comes together, because obviously some of that's a team effort. But we'll start with all of your hard work. Christina, how long have you been working on this book?
7 years, the better part
Hmm.
of 7 years. Still a long time.
That is a
A
lot.
long time.
Yeah.
But
And
but
I
this was
think
like the labor of love for you. This was almost the one that started everything, isn't it?
Yeah, so this was the book that I wanted to read, and I didn't see it out there, so I wanted to write it because I wanted to read it. So it took me so long because there's been some amazing articles written by, historians and archaeologists like here and there, but there was no sort of like comprehensive text. So I wanted to write the comprehensive text and fill in all those gaps. And so it took a long time to get all that information correct, not in partial, of course, due to the fire in 1922, which made finding sources quite difficult. But I also wanted to do justice to the work. And so it did take 7 years. To be fair, also, a couple of those years I was writing another book, my first book. but I still was working on this simultaneously.
Mm.
But it really was a labor of love. Um, it is in many ways my love letter to the craft beer community here that took me in when I had no friends and have become sort of, my all of my friends are sort of part of this, and my family here. They are. And so it's certainly sort of a love letter back to all of those people who welcomed me when I had no one.
Yeah, and I think it's so important because, again, sadly, Martin Cornell just recently died, so we're losing, bits and pieces because so much of this might live just in people's heads in some cases. Because only I would say, for the sake of argument, the past sort of 15 or 20 years, have people really understood how important those primary sources are, because a lot of things have been sort of myths repeated, or you'll sort of say the same fact sort of recycled again and again. And I think for a lot of people, the history of beer in Ireland kind of starts and ends with Guinness. So it's so important to really be like, you certainly talk about, 18th century brewing, and that's a fascinating chapter, but there's so much more to talk about. So how did you even kind of begin to unpack all of these different, bits and pieces? Like you say, 1922 meant we're missing a lot of those primary sources, but there's obviously before and after as well. So how did you even begin to kind of think how to sort of shape it, and which bits of research were kind of going to be the most, if you like, kind of meaningful rabbit holes?
Yeah, so I'm a medievalist by like professional training. So my doctoral thesis, my PhD, was actually in gendered symbolism and Viking burial practice. So I'm actually an archaeologist, anthropologist by proxy of my PhD. My master's is in history, and then I do a sort of multi genre approach to things. So I do history, archaeology, and anthropology, and I combine all of those when I work. So I do go through everything with that kind of a lens. But because my background specialized in sort of medieval Ireland, that's where I started. And of course, I pulled a lot from my thesis for my chapter on Vikings. So that was great to be able to use my thesis, because usually only like, two people read those.
Yeah.
And one of them is your supervisor. So I'm exaggerating, but of course. But so it was nice to kind of be able to reuse that. But then with my master's background and my master's thesis being on women in early medieval Ireland, I was familiar with a lot of the sources. And so I knew sort of where to look for that. So that was sort of the jumping off point. Um, and then, of course, I've been greatly inspired. You mentioned Martin Cornell. He's been an absolute hero and inspiration to me. Um, Ron Pattison as well. There's so many amazing beer historians in the UK that I was looking up to. And then there's all the wonderful women working in beer history. Um, there's, the Chicago Brewseum, which is now the Beer Culture Center. So these were Teresa McCullough out of the, Liz Garabag, like just amazing researchers whose work I was reading and I was interested in, and I was seeing how they were approaching things. And so, maybe they were doing it in a different country, or maybe they were studying in a different place. But it inspired me to say, oh, maybe there is something like this here. Jennifer Jordan, again from the Beer Culture Center, is looking at hop growing, and so I'm thinking, okay, what about women in hop growing? Like, we don't have to limit ourselves just to brewing and just reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. I think an important part of being a historian or anyone in the arts is collaborating and to make sure that you're reading not just within your sort of niche, but well beyond your specific topic, because firstly, the parallels are just absolutely fascinating. Secondly, I mean, it's wonderful to just have that knowledge of people all over the world. But thirdly, you just don't know what you're going to find and say, oh my gosh, I wonder if they were doing that here. Or is there something similar? Or are we doing the opposite? And if we are doing something different, why? So I think widely reading really informed a lot of how I approached things. And then my sort of, I guess, academic background.
Yeah, I think it's so important too to bring in that, that sort of multidisciplinary lens that you're talking about, because so much of this is scattered across different things that maybe this is in one obscure journal on X, but it speaks to, and not X the X, we don't mean that, we mean X just standing for something, to be clear. We don't like Nazis. Anyway, but back to, the whole sort of broader thing of, there's something about being able to pull on those different kinds of resources and to just kind of know where they are. And I think also, with my own background in archaeology as well, I know sometimes it's important to know when it's not the area you're an expert in, but it doesn't mean you can't learn from it and can sort of, again, cross-pollinate. So it's about how do you then find those other, kind of those other people who are experts to kind of go down that rabbit hole and, kind of get the other sources and, make sure you're not just kind of, again, repeating something that's been out there already. And I think that's what I love about this book is there's so much new to me who knows a reasonable amount of a bunch of these things, but the depth and the characters you've uncovered here, I think it's just like amazing, because I think if we go back to our episode on St. Bridget, you managed to work a couple of things in, but I think I don't know, Katie, I'd kind of love to get your perspective on kind of what you know about St. Bridget, and then kind of Christina, some of what you have in the book. It's just, I find so much more kind of vibrant and funny, really. I think that's another thing is there's real humor in a lot of these histories if you look for it, if you know where to kind of bring it up. And I wondered how you kind of managed to be like, we don't have to be serious all the time. A lot of this is good fun, and then some of it too is very serious. But again, that balance I think is interesting to think about how you landed on that.
Yeah, well, my experience of Saint Bridget, is through the Catholic school system in Ireland, which is and when I listen to like Christina talk about it or read about it, I'm like, tell us all of this stuff. It's like, oh, Bridget put her cloak out over a piece of ground, and that was her realm, and she loved animals and birds and creatures. Like, that's all you really know. Like, you don't know that she is the patron saint of brewers. You don't you're There's so much that you were never taught in school,
Mm.
because it's through a lens. You were taught, well, I went to a rural Catholic Irish school in the 80s. 80s. Yeah. Oh God, I'm old. So seeing it, having someone put it into such an interesting format is absolutely fabulous. And all her stories and her gutsy approach to life and everything. She's just fabulous.
Mm.
Yeah,
I,
I really admire her.
but I think you've done such a good job of kind of balancing the the story and the pleasure it can bring being a story, even if it's not provable or true or something, because I think it's can only be super, super hard to write everything factually or, based on just what you can find evidence for. But some of the magic is in the lore and is in the sort of, everything that goes around it. So, nice to balance both of it as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about stories that are, 1,000, 1,500 years old, and whether they're true or not doesn't actually matter all that much. Because they've meant so much to Irish storytelling and Irish folklore, and they've been repeated and retold. And also the people telling the story that, writing 150 years after she died or later, they're talking about a lot of times, things that they saw themselves, things that they experienced in their own society. So we can look at these things and say, okay, well, maybe, nuns were brewing, for example, if St. Bridget is brewing, and this is something that they were familiar enough to know, okay, one measure of malt's not going to cut it. They knew the brewing process. And so whilst maybe she didn't explode a nobleman's eyeballs because he was being insolent. Um, it doesn't actually matter that much. Um, because we can learn just not even about, I'm talking about the medieval history, but we can also learn so much about how she carries herself. And maybe we can see things, oh, I like that she just did what she wanted to do. And there's certainly, things to look at and say, okay, that's sort of inspirational there. Um, and the stories remain really important, as time goes on. We want to hear stories about women like this. And I think it's important to tell them as they were written, and or maybe retell them in our own words or with a little fun, but to keep, you know, to the core of the story for modern audiences, so that way in another 1,000 years people will be talking about, oh, you know, these stories are 2,500 years old and we're still telling them, you know. So I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think there's a big piece there too of like, one, we're in, you know, really excitingly, we're in an era where there's a real revival in interest in folklore, folk life, all of these things, and that is kind of another way into this, I think, for some people. But it's also so important because, you know, as you know, sometimes when you're looking at the primary source, there'll be, you know, what they thought of as a recipe, but there are bits they didn't bother putting in because it was obvious to them, and so they didn't bother saying, oh, now you do X, now you do Y. But sometimes if you go back to the folklore, you can kind of almost, you know, reverse engineer from a story what should have been or kind of what was just known to people. And of course, I can't think of a good example right now, but I've seen a lot of those where you've been able to be like, oh, well, they did this because it was obvious to them to put in, you know, let's say this amount of, you know, grain or whatever. And so it's another way of sort of filling in some of those gaps that we don't have, and I think quite a fun way of filling in some of those gaps. We can just sort of take that leap from the folklore and then marry it up with what we know about the, you know, what people actually wrote down, because, you know, sometimes people didn't even write down what they were really doing. So you have to kind of always have that sort of slightly we'll say sort of slightly skeptical lens on, wait, really? Okay. So it's always good to just have that angle as well. But I think again, I wonder, I know we've talked a little bit about, you know, Bridget here, but what were some of your other favorite maybe characters that you came across as you were researching the book? And sort of second question too, are there any who didn't make it into the book where you're like, ah, they just don't fit, or that you're like, I'm going to save them for something else?
Yeah, so I think one of my favorite, you know, because some of the stories are folklore, and then some of them are historical. And so one of my favorite real figures is Peg Plunkett, um, and her memoirs. So Peg was a very, very famous 18th century courtesan. The newspapers like wrote all about her comings and goings. She was a celebrity. Um, and in her, you know, her later years, she wrote her memoirs down, and you know, she apparently had a bit of beer snobbery, a streak of beer snobbery that I find very endearing. And yeah, I find her fascinating. I find the way that she writes really witty. I she I really enjoy the way that she writes, and I think that's kind of similar. The reason why I focused on characters and stories, real people or mythical, when I was working on the book is because we can see ourselves in them, and or if we can't see ourselves in them, we can see maybe someone we know or a TV show or something that we relate to. For example, in the medieval period, there's these triads of Ireland which talk about, you know, three good things, three bad things, three whatever. And one of them talks about, you know, one of life's joys is like, you know, a bath and a beer. And I think many of us can kind of relate to coming home on a cold day in Ireland or wherever you live, and the enjoyment of, you know, maybe a beer or even a glass of wine and like a hot bath. I mean, I think at some point there were even like Instagrams like devoted to, you know, shower beers and the concept of it. Um,
Right.
so it's something that we can kind of see ourselves in the stories, and it's important to get the history right, but I think it's important to view it through the lens of either the people that actually lived it or the people who were written about having lived it, because then
Yeah.
we kind of can visualize it perhaps a little bit better and relate to it. It feels more tangible, more normal, more, oh, you know, I can see myself.
Yeah,
I,
absolutely. And
I
I think,
definitely
yeah,
relate
again,
to the,
those
you
people
know,
are very
wanting
relatable.
a want, yeah, wanting a beer and a warm shower or a warm bath after. Are you kidding me? And you know, I think sometimes we sort of glorify, you know, people's easy lives at any time of, you know, not present periods, and it's nice to be able to relate to something so basic. Dig it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, I thought she was fascinating too. And just, you know, like you said, she's sort of one of those people where, you know, that particular, I find that era of celebrity kind of just fascinating. Like those particular sort of, that group of kind of actresses and courtesans. And sometimes the line is blurry for that era. And sometimes it's not, but I find that really, really interesting. And I think, again, interesting in the context of your book as well as kind of your first book, how they were kind of in some ways almost sort of global celebrities because they were popular in London and here, and they were known kind of throughout the English speaking world, however you define that at that point. So I think that's a really interesting thing too, is that even though we're talking about the history of beer in Ireland, like it is of trade as well, like it's always sort of interconnected, like from, as you point out, there are Vikings rocking up and all of these things. It's never been little island doing its own thing. There's always been these influences, some positive, some negative, and the same is true everywhere else too. Like it's always been a very global thing. And I mean, again, not to bore people about like my master's dissertation, but it's all about trade in the Bronze Age, and people are always moving back and forth all the time. Like there's no time when they're all just like hanging out doing nothing. So I wonder like how you kind of came to sort of think about how to talk about those sort of interconnected pieces while also still saying, but here's what was happening here, as you said before, kind of what's happening here that's different or the same and why. So how did you kind of maybe contextualize those things?
Yeah, well, naturally, because of the English colonization and invasion, and the English and Scottish settlers on the plantations, colonizers, that naturally lent itself to comparison. And then, of course, the first wave of colonization, and then sort of like culturalization. So the Vikings sort of amalgamated with the Irish, which is my argument, though some scholars kind of debate that. But I would stand with the scholars that think like eventually they sort of blended together to some extent. So I looked at it through the lens of colonization, and so that was sort of the great comparison. Is what's the difference between the Viking invasions and the English invasions, and how does that look like in beer culture? And because beer culture is never just beer culture, it's also powers and rituals, particularly in the medieval period. I mean, even now, a lot of deals are sort of solidified over drinking together, or maybe not ale, maybe you're having a shot, or maybe like wine or whatever, but it is an important part of sort of feasting and ritual culture. And that was certainly the case, although perhaps more more overtly in the medieval period. So it was sort of tracing and looking at those comparisons on how did beer, in the case of the Viking Norse invasions and then the Norse settlement, how did ale, I should say, so non-hopped beer, work as a way to blend the cultures. And it's easy to say, okay, well, the cultures are very similar about this, so it's a perfect way for people to say, hey, we do this, you do this, let's understand this. Because there were other ways that the Viking invaders and the Norse did not speak the same sort of language. One is the rules of war that the Irish sort of engaged with, because a lot of people believed that Ireland was underpopulated in the medieval period. So they didn't engage in the early medieval period. So they didn't engage in like all out violent warfare the same way that we sort of conceptualize other, there were other ways of sort of fighting that didn't necessarily involve lots and lots of bloodshed. And when the Norse originally came, they had different weapon technology and not those same rules, which caused a lot of problems. But then they learned the rules and things changed, and vice versa. But one place they were similar with is their culture around ale and its use in ritual. So it's one of those ways that we can speak in other languages. And it's same now, when we have beer ladies events and we have people from all over the world, we can understand, oh, I like this, or I don't like this, or, it's a great talking point. It still serves the same sort of purpose, though perhaps not ritually in kingship, but certainly in friendship. We can kind of all communicate around a beer and what it means to us or doesn't mean to us, or what we like or what we don't like. So it still serves in that kind of medium, in sort of more of a microcosm in our everyday lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, to sort of segue slightly into, again, mentioned it a bit earlier, but just the beautiful design of this book, how much kind of say did you get to have in that? What kind of, again, these things are all a collaboration when you get to this point, but how did that process go for you? And again, it's such a beautiful book. People who don't have it yet gotta get on that. So
Yes, so my publisher is 90 Rose, Kristen Jensen. She is an absolute legend. Adore her, adore working with her. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Would publish all my book. Like I just adore her. So I was involved as as much as I wanted to be. So the book is designed by Matthew Cox, and the illustrator is Tobias Hall. And I had this vision of sort of like a beery, dense, macabre. And oh my God, like he just,
It's so cool.
it's so
It's
cool.
cool.
I want to get it tattooed. Not the whole thing, but like,
You should. For those
um,
not watching, Christina's just showing the book cover, sort of front and back, but it is the most glorious kind of. It's almost like a dance of all these kind of macabre characters with their beards. It's just beautiful.
it is. So it's a
It's a lovely
dance.
style as well.
I should explain what a dance macabre is if you're not familiar. So it is a sort of memento mori kind of style, medieval, early modern motif, where people from like all walks of life or wealthy or whatever are depicted dancing with skeletons, which represent death. So it's basically saying it doesn't matter who you are. You can be a king, you can be, someone who's very poor. You're going to end up dying. So remember, you're going to die and behave accordingly. And so I wanted to do that because sort of the running theme that I talk about through the book and I introduce in the introduction is sort of communing with your ghost. So talking with the ghost, which is this sort of, talking with the past here. So this sort of dance macabre and like having all, speaking of the cast of characters here and yeah, because similarly to death for a lot of history, ale was something that rich or poor, you were probably consuming or had consumed. And this does change later on. And when we start to get into the 19th century or, late 18th, 19th century, when people are simply too poor and they cannot afford ale anymore. But for a long time, it was something that most people probably drank and had access to.
yeah, kind of a great leveler there. Yeah, it's again, it's such an evocative way of pulling it all together, and it's great. But I think again, and then I know you've told the story of how you got the title, multiple times. But for those who haven't heard it, maybe just a quick summary, because I think people will know your first book was on women in brewing in the UK, and this one, of course, is not exclusively women in brewing here, although obviously you shine a big spotlight on them. So I wonder if you want to sort of lead people into that. And again, you don't have to tell the whole story because they should buy the book, but I think it is a great title, and it's again such a it's great, I think, to be able to pull these things from effectively a primary source. So I'll give you the floor.
Yes, so in 1610, a man by the name of Barnaby Rich, who was an English army captain, who, as I said before, had absolutely zero qualifications on the matter, decided he was going to write a book on the Irish people. And he wrote a biased, bigoted piece, as you can possibly imagine. And in his diatribes, he referred to the alewives of Dublin as most filthy queens and a bunch of like other horrible things, and that you have to read the book to kind of get into. Because Barnaby said a lot. And so I take a lot of time. So anyway, he said filthy queens, which, if you're familiar with the context of UK brewing, there were a lot of like the Chester mystery plays and John Skelton, who wrote all these horrible things about alewives, and no one really kind of checked them on it. At least we haven't seen evidence of that. Maybe, when they're walking down the street, maybe someone yelled at them, or, who knows what was going on in the personal life or personal people's conversations about it. But certainly, I have not encountered sort of a written rebuttal to John Skelton. However, Barnaby Rich had to write an apology, literally an apology and excuse for his first book, A New Description of Ireland. And in it, he apologized to the alewives of Dublin and made this whole like song and dance about how he wasn't talking about the good sword. He was talking about the bad sword over there. Just a lot of complete nonsense. Because, as I said, I read the first book. He really just threw everybody in. So he was really trying to backtrack. So you have to imagine how icy, perhaps, of a reception he was getting. What, like, very unpopular, it seems, book. maybe not able to get any ale or beer, or an icy reception when he did. So things must have been unpleasant enough that he felt like he had to, if you can imagine the hubris of someone like him having to write a sort of a retraction. So the reason I called it Filthy Queens is because it feels like very much a reclamation of an insult. Oh, you tried this and it didn't work. So let's claim let's claim it. I want to be, a Filthy Queen. Like this is something that, you tried to insult us with and it didn't work. So yeah.
Oh, I love it. Again, it's another one of those examples like twas ever this, like no one asked him to say anything. He could have just shut up and said nothing. But he got himself, at least he apologized and was it sincere? Who can say? But you know what? He didn't have to say anything at all. So important life lesson for folks out there. Rich people can just shut up and be rich and let other
Hey,
If
people.
only. If only.
rich white men can shut up.
Mostly, absolutely. But anyway, moving swiftly onward. Now, I wonder again. There's so much in the book, and I think again, you work in a Viking ghost story, which makes me very happy because I love that kind of thing, like all kinds of wonderful things, and you get up to the modern, kind of the early modern period as well, and beyond. But is there one particular and maybe kind of myth you're hoping really gets busted? But like maybe this time it'll stick. I know, never maybe going to get people to fully understand that no, people were not drinking beer because the water, et cetera, et cetera. We always try, we'll always keep saying it, but I wonder, is there anything along those lines where you're like, if people take one thing away and it, really convinces them that this was never the case, is there one that you really were like, not that it's a hill you die on, but it's one you'd feel that little bit better about it being out there in the world?
Oh, I will absolutely die on the hill that alewives were not accused of malicious witchcraft
Very good.
because they brewed ale. I mean, like
Yeah, fair.
I have in some ways built a big portion of my career on yelling about that on the internet.
I mean, that's fair. People are wrong, and it's terrible. Yes.
No, in Ireland there's very few witch trials. And it just simply is not the case here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything about the continent because I haven't explored that link there, so it very well could be a thing there. I cannot speak to that. But I can tell you in the UK and Ireland, not a thing.
No, exactly that. Yeah. So
I want
folks,
to know.
you know,
I want to know if there were any stories or any particular tidbits that you left out that you kind of wanted to include, but maybe you weren't ready, or you still, for whatever reason that you left out that would like to share.
Yes. So, well, yes. So for my third book, I'm going to drop a bit of hints. I'm going to focus on drinks folklore. So, we're going to do a book with like drinks folklore and then alongside some history and context, but I'm going to be retelling the stories. So sometimes the stories are short, so I'm going to be expanding them or just adding a bit more detail, but never changing the story or any of the like important parts, but just sort of retelling them. And then giving like historical context and like bringing it up into modern, and there's a bunch to it. I don't want to give too much away. So there's quite a few stories that I came across in folklore that I couldn't include in this book because I already had one example that just fit really well with the chapter, with maybe like other examples in the chapter. And while this one was brilliant, it just didn't fit as well. So stories like that are probably gonna feature into this. And then also I came across stories, involving whiskey or mead or water. And this is, of course, very beer focused, but my next book will be about drinks in general. So milk, water, whiskey, mead, as well as ale will all be sort of encompassed. So a lot of those stories that I didn't get to tell in this book, I'm hoping to include in this sort of folklore retellings alongside, the history and cultural influence of the stories, that see if anything lingers up into modern day. So
I'm very
keep an
excited.
eye out for that.
Sounds so cool.
That sounds so cool. And I'm hoping there might be like recipes or stuff that we can make ourselves. Oh my God, I can't wait. And you haven't even written it yet.
I'm working on it. I'm working
Yeah.
on the first chapter, which just a little, you can try to guess which book. The first chapter is called I Dare You. And so yes, you can try to guess which one that is.
Oh, very sneaky and oh, I love it. Oh, little hints, folks. Little hints here and there, but I'll have to wait. All will be revealed. But I've already got the wheels turning, and I'm like, oh, I can think of great events that would be, that already do kind of drinks and folklore crossovers, and because again, this is how my brain works. So, it's very sad, but it's cool. It's
It's
cool. So.
fun.
Yeah, it means I'm gonna get the book, obviously. But yeah, there's I think again there's such a resurgence of this kind of thing that hopefully it'll find that big audience and hopefully get you a bunch of checks and you can go have a nice holiday and enjoy after you're done with this one. So,
I
you
tell
know,
you what, I mean, Christina, you have been the most busy person of it,
yeah,
I think, out of everyone, touring all over the place, appearing on shows and podcasts and all, all sorts of appearances. So I think that for anybody who wants to catch up on more of the other times you've spoken, do you have a little roundup of some highlights that you've been doing and stuff?
Yeah. So I'm recording 3 podcasts this week. So ours, in addition to the Three Castles Burning podcast,
Nice.
which I'm like so excited to be on. I am such a huge fan. I can't even I
I'm
literally
so
can't.
excited about it. So head down, can't wait to hear that. It's gonna be amazing.
Yes. And then I also was on the British Food History podcast this week, or recorded, which was also amazing, like amazing. I'm also a huge fan of that. So it's really cool to be on podcasts that you kind of been listening to, and you're like, oh my gosh,
Oh
I like
yeah,
this podcast.
oh, so
No,
cool.
and I've been on the Irish History podcast. Oh gosh, the RTE History podcast. There's I don't want to let. There's been so many that I'm not thinking of, and then there's been so just amazing coverage in the media. Aoife Carrigy wrote an amazing article for the Irish Independent on Filthy Queens. I'm really, 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 really grateful that it's resonating with people. That people seem to be enjoying it and really into it because you know it means the world. Like after
Yeah,
7 years, it's like you're a baby, and you're like, here, please be nice. Um, don't be too
Yeah.
mean. And so when people like it really makes me happy to have a book that other people enjoy reading because
Yeah.
I love to read. So it's nice to make something that other people enjoy reading.
here. And I
And
think
I
again, such a testament to the book that I've seen it everywhere from the National Gallery here to like cool little indie bookshops. Like it's just really exciting. Like it's popped up in places even I kind of wouldn't expect. And that must be, like you're saying, kind of so gratifying to suddenly see it somewhere where you're like, oh, my book, it's there. It just
Yeah,
fun.
pictures of people in Hawaii like taking pictures and being like, "Oh, I'm reading Filthy Queens," and I'm like, "Oh my God, you're reading Filthy Queens!" Like I'm just so excited. Um, it's been thrilling. It's like I said, I am absolutely like so, so, so grateful that people are reading it, people are liking it. It just I'm humbled and it's so cool. Like it's just amazing. I don't know. I'm just like blown away.
Well, as we begin to wrap up, I feel like now that you've got, book 2 out there in the world and people are loving it, you're beginning work on book 3. Now we can ask you, the big question, do you have advice for other aspiring beer historians? Because now you're the one who's kind of, the expert and is, kind of battle tested. So what are you going to tell people and maybe where should they start to dig?
Um, dig where you're passionate. Find what you love. Because if you're really into something and you're passionate about it, other people will follow. When you speak with something and you're excited and you're, really enthusiastic, people will listen to you. And think about who your audience is. So if you're traditionally an academic, and I think really academic writing needs to be more accessible to the general public. So I do encourage academics, even if you are in academia, to write books the general public can read and access, because I don't think we should be gatekeeping that knowledge. Um, So you can write it with academic rigor, but you can still tell amazing stories. And I think especially with drinks history and food history, there's so many amazing stories to be told. And it's also something that, like I've said before, it's tangible. People can touch it, they can relate to it. It's a really great medium to bring people into history. So I think, read a lot. Read books that aren't related to history at all. Read books by public historians. Read funny books. Read horror books. Read every romance books. Read every kind of book you can see to see, oh, I like this writing style. Oh, I don't like this. Oh, I like it when people do this. Oh, I don't like this. And find your voice. So it's not just, putting down the information. It's finding how you specifically say the information, because it's really important that we have multiple people talking about the same things. To be honest, like, it's really good when multiple people are looking at the same thing, because we get all those different viewpoints. So you really want to come up with a voice and a viewpoint that is uniquely yours and that adds your opinions, your thoughts, your interpretations to the story in this sort of collaborative environment we have around beer history. And don't be discouraged because someone else has talked about it, because that doesn't mean that you shouldn't also add your voice to that conversation. And yeah, I'm very collaborative. So if anybody, I mean, I honestly think that we should all be collaborative. I think, I'm here to help when I can, if I can. So, if you're really interested in beer history, reach out. Like, I'm happy to have a talk and like see, if I can help. And again, I don't think you need to um yeah, like, just my first thing would be to read as much as you can.
It's great advice. And again, I think it's your voice shines through so sort of, what's the right word? Also, it's so directly in this book.
Authentically. Mm.
Yeah, we can hear you in it, and it's just it's such a pleasure to read. So anyone who hasn't got it yet, go pick up a copy, because it is such a joy. And then, again, you can say you got it before book number 3 comes out, so no pressure.
Yeah, like, I really wanted to write the book. Like, I was talking to you all around a pint at the pub.
Yeah,
And that was kind of how I wanted to write it, because I was like, if you can't understand it like I was saying it out loud, then it needs to be rewritten in the book. It has to be straightforward, but also, I wanted it to be funny where it could be funny. I wanted it to be serious where I need to be serious, but I wanted it to be something that could be understood around a pint at a pub with my friends. And that's my voice, that's how I.
Now, don't sell yourself short, because I think it takes an enormous amount of talent to be able to write in an interesting, consumable, approachable way while being historically rigorous and factual, and
Yeah.
being able to cite sources. Like, you've got a very special thing going on, and I think it's amazing, and you should just be applauded and celebrated, my friend.
here, yay!
Love you all.
Oh,
Oh, me
yeah, and we're
too.
just so proud of everything you've achieved so far, and we know there's so much more to come, but it's just so great to see this taking off in the world, and we want more exciting events to come. We're just so thrilled for you and all of your upcoming appearances, which again, folks, keep an eye on the socials. We always try to remind people of where Christina might be speaking, or where there may be another event. So keep an eye out, and as she's saying, you always come up and say hi, and maybe you've got or maybe you've got a great idea, or maybe you've got, and I'm gonna use the word dusty, because it's what people say, but maybe you've got what seem like non-important old dusty papers in an attic or in a basement somewhere. But let people know if you've got those, because there's so much missing, and people would be more than happy to take a look and appraise those for you. And I don't mean appraise money appraise, I mean appraise to be like, what's in it, but not to get all technical and boring. But if you've got those things, let people know. Talk to your local library. Talk to your local archive, or ask someone who's kind of in this biz. We can advise you on where to go next. So very, very exciting times, and let people know. But mostly, again, Christina, we're so proud of you. Any other closing thoughts on this book before we let Christina go, so she can actually go off and get this next chapter done? No pressure. No, silence is golden. Well, see, you've
No
answered the
thoughts?
questions already.
Well,
So again, it's an amazing book. Everyone go out and buy Filthy Queens. Look for upcoming appearances. Follow us on the usual things. We'll be out again in your ears in a month-ish time, thereabouts. on a topic to be revealed later, but it's coming. We're back. We're on, a schedule-ish. It's just, as we've said before, it's not weekly because, as you heard at the beginning, we are all busy. But if you want more of these books to come out, you gotta, make sure that like monthlies is a good schedule for you guys. So thank you then to all of my amazing co-hosts. And again, special big love to Christina and Filthy Queens. We cannot wait to see it out in more places in the world. And to all of our wonderful listeners, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
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 Bye.